No man is more dangerous than a king with nothing left to lose. Except a king terrified of losing his only heir. Marco Salvatore ruled Chicago's underworld, but all his power meant nothing while his infant son withered away in an incubator. It took one observant nurse to uncover the truth every elite specialist in the building had missed. The 7th floor of Chicago's prestigious St. Aurelia Memorial Hospital did not belong to the board of directors. For 3 weeks, it had belonged to the Salvatore crime family. Heavily armed men in tailored Italian suits stood like statues at every elevator bank and stairwell. No one entered the neonatal intensive care unit without being thoroughly vetted, searched, and glared down by the grieving, ferocious head of the family, Marco Salvatore. Marco was a man carved from granite and ruthlessness. At 32, he carried a terrifying reputation, a billion-dollar syndicate, and a stare that could freeze blood. But standing outside the glass incubator of his premature son, Theo, the dreaded Mafia boss, was just a helpless, broken father. Theo's birth had come soaked in blood. 3 weeks earlier, a rival faction had planted a bomb beneath the SUV of Marco's wife, Isabel. The blast had taken her life, but paramedics had somehow saved the child, delivering him at barely 32 weeks. Since that day, Marco hadn't left the hospital. He barely slept, running on grief, espresso, and an overwhelming need to protect the last piece of Isabel he had left. But despite the millions Marco poured into the hospital, despite hiring the most elite pediatric specialists on the East Coast, baby Theo was dying. "Explain it to me again." Marco's voice was a low, lethal rumble that made the chief of neonatology, Dr. Harlan Voss, swallow hard. "Mr. Salvatore, as I've stated, premature infants often face severe gastrointestinal challenges," Dr. Voss said, adjusting his glasses with a trembling hand. He was used to wealthy, demanding parents, but the men flanking Marco with concealed firearms made him visibly sweat. "It's a complex case of malabsorption syndrome. We're pumping him full of high-calorie total parenteral nutrition, TPN, but his body isn't processing the lipids and proteins. His metabolism is burning through it faster than he can absorb it." "He weighed 5 pounds 3 days ago," Marco said, stepping dangerously close to the glass, eyes fixed on the tiny chest rising and falling beneath a dozen wires. "Today he's 4 pounds 6 ounces. He is fading away, doctor. And you're telling me a state-of-the-art facility can't figure out why a child is starving to death while hooked up to a feeding tube? We are doing everything medically possible. Do better." Marco grabbed the lapels of Dr. Voss's white coat. The guards at the door shifted, hands resting on their holsters. "If my son stops breathing, so do you." From across the sterile room, Nurse Cora Bennett watched the exchange with a mixture of apprehension and quiet fury. Cora wasn't easily intimidated. At 27, she'd spent 5 years in the NICU fighting for the lives of the most vulnerable patients in the world, fiercely dedicated, sharp-witted, with a maternal instinct that had saved countless infants. She'd also grown up on Chicago's South Side. She knew exactly who and what Marco Salvatore was. While the rest of the nursing staff trembled just changing Theo's IV bags, Cora treated Marco like any other stressed parent, with firm, professional boundaries. "Mr. Salvatore," Cora said, her voice cutting through the tension. She walked over carrying a fresh stack of sterilized blankets. "Let go of the doctor. You're raising the ambient stress in the room, and Theo's heart monitor is spiking." Marco froze. He turned his dark, hollow eyes toward the young woman in pale blue scrubs. For a second, the room held its breath, waiting for the Mafia boss to erupt. Instead, he glanced at the monitor, saw the baby's heart rate climbing, and slowly released his grip. Dr. Voss scrambled backward, gasping. I'll go review the lab results again," he stammered, hurrying out. Marco ran a heavy hand over his face, looking entirely defeated. "He's slipping away from me, Cora," he murmured, the first time he'd used her name. Cora softened, stepping up to the incubator. She reached through the porthole, gently resting a gloved finger against Theo's tiny palm. The baby instinctively wrapped his microscopic fingers around it. "I know it looks terrifying, Mr. Salvatore, but Theo is a fighter. Call me Marco." He watched her interact with his son, noticing the way she looked at Theo. Not with the clinical detachment of the doctors, or the terrified pity of the other nurses, but with genuine protective warmth. "Why is he losing weight, Cora? Tell me the truth." "Is Voss lying to me?" Cora hesitated. She'd been reviewing Theo's charts meticulously for the past 48 hours, and something about his decline was gnawing at her instincts. Premature babies with malabsorption issues usually showed other signs: severe bowel distension, specific liver enzyme spikes. Theo had none of those. Just a steady, relentless caloric deficit, as if the food he was receiving was entirely void of nutrients. "I don't know," Cora admitted, brow furrowing. "But I'm going to look into it. I promise you, Marco. I won't let anything happen to him on my watch." That night, long after Marco had finally collapsed into a fitful sleep on the leather sofa in the private waiting room, Cora sat at the nurse's station cross-referencing Theo's blood panels against his feeding schedule. She pulled up the digital logs. The baby was receiving a specialized TPN bag every 12 hours, custom mixed in the hospital pharmacy on Dr. Voss's strict orders. Cora plotted the baby's daily weight checks against shift changes. A cold chill crept up her spine. Theo wasn't losing weight gradually. The drops were episodic. His weight stabilized during the day, but every morning at 6 a.m., following the night shift's TPN infusion, his weight dropped drastically. His body was literally flushing the nutrients overnight. "It's not malabsorption," Cora thought, heart hammering. "It's an induced metabolic crisis. Someone was intentionally keeping the infant from absorbing his food. But who and how?" The secure wing was flooded with Marco's men. A physical attack on the baby was impossible, but a chemical one could bypass all the muscle and guns in the world. She needed proof. Accusing the chief of neonatology of harming a Mafia Don's baby without hard evidence was a death sentence for her, and likely for the doctor too. She needed to know exactly what was in those IV bags. At 3 a.m., the ward was deathly quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Cora quietly left the station and made her way to the secure medical refrigeration room where the TPN bags were stored. She swiped her key card. The heavy door clicked open, and cold, sterile air bit her cheeks. She found Theo's designated shelf, 2 fresh bags of milky white liquid, prepped for the morning and evening feeds. Cora lifted one bag, holding it to the fluorescent light. It looked perfectly normal. The barcode matched. The seal was intact. She ran her thumb along the plastic seam, and there it was, almost microscopic, hidden behind the printed label. A tiny puncture mark sealed with a dab of clear medical-grade adhesive. Someone had injected something into the bag after it left the pharmacy. Cora quickly pulled a sterile syringe from her pocket, drew a small sample of the milky fluid, and slipped the vial into her scrub pocket. She'd run it through the mass spectrometer in the basement lab herself. As she stepped out of the refrigeration unit, she collided with a wall of muscle. She gasped, stumbling back. Marco Salvatore stood in the dimly lit hallway, shadows cutting harsh angles across his face. Dangerous, a stark contrast to the broken father she'd seen hours earlier. "What are you doing sneaking around the supply room at 3 in the morning? Cora." His voice was velvet and steel. Her hand instinctively brushed the pocket where the vial was hidden. "I was checking inventory for Theo's morning feed." Marco stepped closer, crowding her against the wall. Dark espresso and expensive cologne surrounded her. "You're a terrible liar. Your pulse is racing. I can see the vein in your neck." He leaned down. "You found something. Tell me." Cora looked up at him, caught between her duty to report to the hospital board and the terrifying reality of the man in front of her. If she told him now, he'd likely execute the entire medical staff. "I have a theory," she whispered, refusing to back down from his gaze. "But if I'm right, Marco, you need to trust me. You cannot fly off the handle. You cannot kill anyone. If you make a scene, whoever's doing this will cover their tracks, and I'll never be able to prove it." Marco's eyes widened a fraction. Someone is doing this to him. The murderous intent rolling off him was suffocating. "Who?" "I don't know yet," Cora lied smoothly. "I need to test his feed, but I need you to stay in the waiting room and act like everything is perfectly normal." "Can you do that?" Marco stared at her for a long, agonizing moment, then reached up, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was startlingly tender, sending a hot spark down her spine. "If you save my boy, Cora, there is nothing in this world I won't do for you." She swallowed hard and nodded. "I'll be back before dawn." She hurried to the service elevators, mind racing, down to the empty basement pathology lab. Using skills from her pharmacology rotation, she fed the sample into the spectrometer and waited. 20 minutes later, the machine printed its results. Cora scanned the readout, eyes widening in horror. Dinitrophenol, ENP, a highly toxic synthetic compound, once used in the 1930s as a diet pill before being banned globally. It worked by uncoupling oxidative phosphorylation in cells, causing the body to burn through fat and calories at a deadly, unstoppable rate, raising internal temperature and starving the organs of energy. Given to a premature baby in microdoses, it mimicked severe failure to thrive perfectly, an invisible, agonizing death sentence, and it could only be administered by someone with access to high-tier medical synthetics. Cora bolted from the lab. She needed to pull the tampered bags immediately and swap them with fresh, untampered supply from another patient's stock to keep Theo alive. Hurrying up the back stairwell to avoid Marco's guards, she paused on the 5th-floor landing. Voices drifted down from the floor above. Taking too long. The boss is starting to ask questions. Cora froze, pressing into the shadows. She recognized the thick, raspy Chicago accent. Anthony Vitale, Marco's cousin and the family's underboss. He'd been a constant presence at the hospital, supposedly offering support. I'm moving as fast as I safely can without raising alarms. A second voice, irritated. Cora's blood ran cold. Dr. Voss. Well, speed it up, Doc, Anthony sneered. Isabel was supposed to die with the brat still inside her. Now we've got this prolonged melodrama. Marco's an emotional wreck. The captains are losing faith in his leadership. If the kid dies, Marco breaks completely. He steps down, I take the seat, and you get that $2 million donation to your private clinic. But if the kid lives, Marco recovers. The compound is working, Voss whispered harshly. His organs are shutting down from the caloric deficit. He won't last another 48 hours. Just keep Salvatore distracted. Cora clapped a hand over her mouth to muffle a gasp. It wasn't a medical error. It was an orchestrated assassination. Anthony Vitale was trying to usurp the throne by torturing Marco through the slow murder of his son. She waited until the stairwell door closed behind Anthony, then heard Voss's lighter footsteps climbing toward the NICU. She sprinted up the remaining stairs, slipping into the 7th-floor corridor just in time to see Voss walking toward the TPN refrigeration room. He was going to spike the next bag. She had to get to the evidence before he destroyed it. She rushed into the supply closet adjacent to the fridge for an evidence bag and a sterile lockbox, but in her haste, a metal bedpan clattered to the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The door to the supply room slowly opened. Cora backed against the wire shelving, clutching the printed lab results. Dr. Voss stepped in and locked the heavy door behind him. He looked at Cora, then down at the paper in her trembling hand. A cold, menacing smile spread across his face. You always were too smart for your own good, Nurse Bennett, he said softly, pulling a pre-filled syringe from his coat pocket. It's a shame about the sudden fatal cardiac arrest you're about to have. He advanced the needle, catching the harsh fluorescent light, expecting the young nurse to cower, to beg, to scream. He expected an easy kill, one he could mask as a tragic, stress-induced cardiac event with the untraceable potassium chloride in his hand. What the arrogant chief of neonatology didn't know was that before Cora Bennett wore pediatric scrubs, she wore desert camouflage. She'd spent 4 years as an Army combat medic, attached to a forward operating base overseas. She was not a civilian who panicked at the sight of a weapon. She was a professional trained to make life-or-death decisions under fire. As Voss lunged, thrusting the needle toward her neck, Cora didn't retreat. She pivoted sharply, stepping inside his guard, and struck his forearm with a brutal palm-heel strike. The crack of fracturing bone echoed in the small room, followed by his high-pitched shriek. The syringe clattered harmlessly to the floor. Before he could process the pain, Cora swept his legs out from under him. He crashed down, breath exploding from his lungs. In a fraction of a second, she had her knee pinned against his throat, cutting off his airway, eyes blazing with cold fury. You broke your Hippocratic oath, Doctor, Cora hissed, pressing down just enough to make his eyes bulge. But more importantly, you tried to murder a helpless infant on my shift. The supply closet door burst open, nearly torn off its hinges. 2 enormous men leveled suppressed firearms into the room, sweeping for targets. A second later, Marco Salvatore stepped through, taking in the scene. The shattered syringe on the floor, the gasping doctor pinned to the tiles, and the pale but composed nurse kneeling on top of him. His eyes flicked to the toxicology report, still clutched in Cora's hand, then to Voss. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Marco didn't yell. He didn't curse. The dead silence radiating from him was infinitely more terrifying. Cora, he said, voice a gravel whisper that sent shivers through his own armed guards. Get up. Cora slowly rose, keeping her eyes on Voss as the guards hauled him to his feet, pinning him against the shelving. He's been poisoning Theo, she said, handing Marco the printout. a synthetic compound called dinitrophenol. It forces the body to burn calories at a lethal rate, mimics severe malabsorption. It wasn't a medical mystery, Marco. It was an assassination. Marco stared at the paper, jaw tightening so hard his teeth looked ready to crack. He stepped toward Voss, drawing a heavy, engraved pistol from his shoulder holster, and pressed the barrel to his forehead. "Please," Voss sobbed, his pants darkening. "Please, Mr. Salvatore, it wasn't my idea. He threatened me, said he'd destroy my career." "Who?" The single word was a death sentence. Cora stepped forward, placing a firm hand over Marco's gun hand. The guards tensed, shocked anyone would dare touch the boss mid-rage. But Marco didn't pull away. He just looked at her. "It was Anthony," Cora said quietly. "I heard them talking in the stairwell. He's orchestrating this. He wants Theo to die, so you suffer a complete psychological break, so he can take your seat at the head of the family." Marco's eyes widened a fraction, the betrayal striking like a physical blow. Anthony Vitale was his own blood. They'd grown up in the same house. "If you shoot Voss now," Cora continued, keeping her voice calm and grounded, "Anthony will hear the gunshot or figure out the doctor's missing. He'll deny everything. And you won't have the proof you need in front of your captains. A boss who executes his own family on mere suspicion loses the respect of his syndicate. We need to trap him. We need him to confess in front of your men." Marco stared at her. In all his years ruling the Chicago underworld, he'd never met a woman whose mind worked with such cold tactical brilliance. She wasn't just saving his son, she was protecting his empire. He slowly lowered the gun and turned his terrifying gaze on the weeping doctor. "Here's what's going to happen, Harlan," he said softly. "You're going to walk back to the NICU and swap my son's poisoned bags for clean ones. He's getting real nutrients tonight. Then at exactly 7 tomorrow morning, you're going to call a code blue. You're going to tell Anthony my son is dead." Voss nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. Yes, anything. "I swear. And if you try to warn him," Marco added, voice devoid of all humanity, "I won't just kill you. I'll have men track down your ex-wife in Boston and your daughter at Stanford, and they'll make sure you watch them burn before I take your eyes. Understood?" Voss made a pathetic, broken sound. "Yes, I understand." Marco turned back to Cora, the murderous aura vanishing, replaced by overwhelming gratitude. "Can you keep my boy stable until morning?" "I'll mix the TPN bags myself," Cora said. "He's going to be fine, Marco. I promise." The next morning, at precisely 7 a.m., the piercing shrill of a code blue echoed through the 7th floor. Within minutes, the private waiting room became a hub of chaotic, manufactured grief. Dr. Voss walked through the double doors, pale and exhausted, head bowed, and delivered the rehearsed news. Baby Theo had succumbed to massive organ failure. Marco played his part with terrifying perfection, shattering a heavy glass coffee table with a single kick, burying his face in his hands, the image of a completely broken king. Anthony Vitale arrived 20 minutes later, his face arranged in solemn mourning, though Cora, watching from the nurse's station, could see the triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Marco, my brother," Anthony murmured, pulling the larger man into an embrace. "I am so sorry. This tragedy, it's too much." "He's gone." "Anthony," Marco whispered, voice cracking perfectly. "I have nothing left." Anthony patted his back, then turned to the 6 Capergaims summoned to the hospital to pay respects. Hardened, dangerous men standing uncomfortably in sharp suits amid the sterile medical environment. "Gentlemen," Anthony announced, voice carrying clearly, "this is a dark day for our syndicate. With the loss of his wife, and now his heir, it's clear Marco is in no condition to lead. His mind is compromised by grief. The rival syndicates are pushing our borders on the south side. Our financial audits show our shell corporations are vulnerable. We need strong, focused leadership." He took a deep breath, puffing out his chest. "As underboss, it's my sworn duty to step up. For the good of the family, I am assuming control of Salvatore operations, effective immediately." The capos exchanged uneasy glances. It was a bold move, but in their world weakness wasn't tolerated. A few began to nod. "Is that right, Anthony?" Marco's voice sliced through the room, not the broken, weeping voice of a grieving father, but sharp, cold, and lethal. He stood, straightening his jacket, and walked past the shattered coffee table, posture radiating absolute authority. He gestured toward the doorway. Cora Bennett walked into the waiting room, cradling a tiny, breathing, very much alive, baby Theo. bundled in a warm blue blanket. His skin was already regaining a healthy pink hue after receiving proper, untainted nutrition for the first time in weeks. Anthony's jaw dropped. All color drained from his face. What is this? Voss said exactly what I told him to say, Marco interrupted smoothly. From the hallway, two of Marco's largest enforcers dragged Dr. Voss into the room and threw him onto the carpet at Anthony's feet. Marco pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and pressed play. The audio filled the silent room. Voss's terrified voice, recorded hours earlier in the supply closet, detailing the entire conspiracy. How Anthony had provided the dinitrophenol, how Anthony had paid him $2 million through offshore accounts to slowly starve the Mafia heir to death so he could usurp the throne. The capos listened, expressions shifting from grief to pure murderous outrage. Betrayal of this magnitude, harming an infant of the dawn, was the ultimate sin in their world. You set me up, Anthony hissed, stepping backward, his hand reaching for the firearm inside his jacket. Before his fingers even touched the grip, 4 capos drew their weapons, aiming at his head. He froze, surrounded by his own men. You broke the oath, Anthony, Marco said quietly, stepping until he was inches from his cousin's face. You targeted a mother and a child. You are no longer family. You are nothing. He turned to his most trusted capo. Take him to the meat facility on Halstead. Take your time with him. Make sure he understands the cost of treason before he stops breathing. No, Marco, please. We're blood, Anthony screamed as the men grabbed him, dragging him kicking and thrashing toward the back service elevator. His screams echoed down the corridor before being silenced by the heavy steel doors. Marco looked down at the trembling doctor. As for you, Harlan, the medical board won't hear about this, but Federal Judge Alden, who owes me a great many favors, will. You're going to plead guilty to massive medical fraud and narcotics distribution. 20 years at Marion. My men control cell block D. I've instructed them to make sure you live a very long, very painful life. Voss collapsed, sobbing into the carpet as the guards hauled him away. The storm had passed. The waiting room was empty now, save for Marco, Cora, and the sleeping infant. Marco walked over to her. The terrifying, ruthless Mafia Don vanished, leaving only a profoundly grateful father. He looked down at Theo, gently stroking the baby's cheek, then slowly lifted his eyes to meet Cora's. You saved my world, Cora, he murmured, the distance between them closing. She smiled softly, not stepping back. I was just doing my job, Marco. Someone had to look out for the little guy. You did more than that. You stood down a killer. You stood down me. He gently cupped her face, thumb grazing her jawline. I owe you a life debt. Name your price. Anything in the world. Cora looked at the powerful, dangerous man, seeing past the syndicate and the violence to the fierce, protective devotion that mirrored her own. I think, she whispered, heart fluttering as he leaned closer, you're just going to have to keep me around to make sure you stay out of trouble. Marco smiled, a rare, genuine expression that lit up his dark eyes. I think that can be arranged. 3 months later, the Salvatore Pediatric Wing opened at St. Aurelia's, fully funded by Marco and overseen by its newly appointed director of nursing, Cora Bennett. Theo Salvatore was a thriving, boisterous infant, safe in his father's arms, and watched over by the brilliant, fearless woman who had become the heart of their family. If this story of Mafia justice, betrayal, and one nurse who outsmarted them all had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button before you go. We drop new, intense, ripped from life dramas every single week. Share this with a friend who lives for a good plot twist, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. What would you have done in Cora's shoes? Tell us in the comments.